Hey, Kurt, Kerry, good morning to one of you. Good afternoon to you, Kerry, and good evening from me in Seattle. First time I've had, I think, this much of a spread of time zones on a live stream before.
Yeah, good morning. Good evening, I guess, as well.
How are you two doing? It's good to have you both back, and first time together, by the way.
It
Pretty
is.
good.
Yeah, Kerry, you go ahead, and then I'll go to you, Kurt. Make it easier.
Yeah, I'm hearing a bit of an echo from you, Reid, I think. So,
If you have my YouTube video playing in the background anywhere, you might be hearing me coming from that.
yeah, that's probably it. Yeah, you're right. I got it.
There you go.
Yeah, no,
But yeah, Kerry, how have you been? It's been a little while.
Busy. Pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah, you're not quite a year in at this point yet, but it's I know you went fully independent sometime last year. Yeah, how's that been going?
Yeah, it's been fun. I'm not totally independent. I do have
Okay.
a number of different roles. But it's been a blast, an absolute blast.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been busy, so happy to hear that things have been going well at least for you. And yeah, again, welcome back, Kurt. It's also been about a year, I think, since we did a reporting talk. But yeah, how have you been as well?
good. Working with SQL BI tabular editor at the moment. Also doing some documentation for Microsoft around Copilot, actually. So, looking forward to that getting published hopefully soon. Some of the diagrams that we'll look at and talk about today will actually in that documentation. But yeah, no, things are good. So I'm definitely awake. I've had enough caffeine, so should be good.
Curiously though, for people who I know you've written a few wipers at this point, would which have all been fantastic of the ones that I read, but would you ever recommend that as a not a it's not a career path for most people, but as like as a side project for some people? How much have you enjoyed writing white papers as a kind of a concise answer to a question?
Yeah, technical writing in general can be interesting. I mean, I think writing as a process is a really nice way to learn things, and it's a really nice way to explore concepts and get your ideas out, especially when you have a lot of very convoluted and multifaceted thoughts on a topic. So getting it down on a page is in my opinion one of the best ways to really explore not only your own thoughts but also to dive through a topic, especially if it's a very basic topic and you're really targeting like a layman audience. I think if you do that, like it's an incredibly rewarding and interesting exercise. Um, for me, of course, it's also like a very visual exercise because I always start with making diagrams, making visualizations and little wireframes to kind of represent the concepts. So it's as much a creative exercise as it is just, a learning thing. So I think it can be nice, but it depends. Like if writing is something you like, it can be cool. Obviously now it's a little bit different because, AI is starting to become involved in the technical writing process for a lot of people and organizations. So I think it's a bit different than if you would have doing it like 5 or 10 years ago. But as long as you're doing it for your own intrinsic reward or, incentive, I think then you can never really go wrong. So
When I like what you said, where it can be good to help translate thoughts to paper and almost help you come to your own conclusions about certain ideas. But I know for you, you've mentioned before that writing and getting ideas down on paper is very cathartic for you, and you've had a lot of late nights getting something just out of your head down as part of a creative process. So it sounds like there's definitely some reward in it for you.
yeah, late nights and early mornings. So like
Exactly.
this.
Yeah. That's 6 a.m. 9 for you, 9:30 p.m. for me, and Carrie, it's 3 p.m. for you.
PM.
There you go. Nice. But coming to the topic of the day as well, we have one on a topic that has been talked about a lot, but I think we're going to be providing a nice spin on it and a new perspective, which is this like what's available with Copilot, what can be used, and I think the to rephrase one that I just mentioned before we went live is the providing like a spoonful of sugar with a spoonful of the bitter truth at the same time. So like talking about the things that are useful and good with it, but also giving fair perspectives on, things that might not be production ready or just aren't as, as wow inducing as maybe other parts of the Copilot platform, because it is quite literally everywhere. And as people have seen now in Office, we just got an entire Office rebrand with the Office homepage now Copilot 365 homepage, which was a jarring change for me this week a little bit, and I'm sure we'll get into. Yeah, I'll hand it to you, Kurt, if you want to talk a bit about what we'll be getting into today.
Yeah. So, and Kerry, feel free to interrupt me if you have something to say as well on this. So, but the idea is indeed like we're not trying to try to showcase or sell Copilot in a certain way. We're just trying to have a critical, thoughtful discussion as well as kind of introducing it. We're talking about Copilot and Fabric, but we're targeting mainly Copilot in Power BI, and largely because Copilot is a very large topic. Not just in the scope of Fabric, but also just across the Microsoft ecosystem. You have Copilot when you're using Edge, you have Copilot when you're using many of the different Microsoft products.
Yeah.
And each of these Copilots are very different. And even within Fabric, the Copilot experiences across the different workloads and items that you're using, they also are very different. So as you'll see. And that's one of the things that we want to highlight. Since this is very new technology, it requires a certain amount of critical thinking and skepticism, especially if you're thinking about implementing it in your organization. There's a lot of things that you need to think about. You can't just flip it on and go. But that's like anything. That's like anything that you're going to use in Power BI in general, right? So,
yep.
And it's not to say that you need to go through this exhaustive preparatory exercise, but just approaching it with the appropriate amount of preparation and thought, and then targeting a kind of incremental approach, then I think that can make a lot of sense. But yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about today.
And I think from each one of us, before we start, I'd love to hear, like, if you could describe in like 1 or 2 sentences, what's the best way to describe how you would just broadly leverage Copilot. So I'll start with mine, and then I'll give it to you, Kerry, and then to you, Kurt. I describe Copilot simply as it's a glorified assistant. It does a lot of stuff very well, but nothing that shouldn't be double checked for the most part. Like, there should be nothing that you should take as gospel that comes out of it, because it still makes mistakes. But from an assistant perspective of helping save you work, great. So yeah, glorified assistant is kind of my like short description of it. But yeah, Kerry, what's a succinct way you might describe it? Go ahead.
I'll tack on to that. I do take umbrage with the term assistant because it personifies the technology, and then that causes some lapse in terms of people's expectation of the technology. So there's quite widely known about this ELIZA effect, right? So if you personify something and something's talking to you, humans just naturally attribute more intelligence to it, right? And more emotion and feeling and consciousness to this technology. So I prefer to use the term assistive technology, and that just helps with resetting, releveling, and sort of equalizing those expectations. Yeah,
I like that. It's a different way to phrase it, but as you pointed out, to remove some of that emotional attachment that humans easily fall into when it comes to things that are human-like in any degree. Nice. What about you,
but it
Kurt?
says the same thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think indeed, like, I think it's really, really correct there, because it's very important to not anthropomorphize this technology and to understand that you're not interacting with something that is equivalent with a human, and it is a probabilistic technology. You're interfacing with the tool, and the purpose of that tool is to augment you for particular tasks, to help you be more efficient, or to help you do certain things, or to do the things you already do better. And I think that there's definitely, as we'll see later today, there's definitely a capacity for Copilot to do that. But it is, as Kerry said, also about setting expectations and understanding what can I do, what shouldn't I do, what is possible, and what are prerequisites, not only in terms of like, I need a certain Fabric capacity, but the prerequisites in terms of what amount of understanding do I need to have of my semantic model, of Power BI, these certain technical things, and how much critical thinking do I need to apply to make sure that I'm validating the outputs that I'm receiving from this thing, and that I actually leverage them. You don't want to go into it and just take everything as gospel, But at the same time, you don't want to think it's wrong all the time, because then you're going to be wasting a lot of time just validating, basically. So it always comes back to like it depends. But I think particularly here, it's just, it's something new. It requires a sort of way of thinking. It requires a lot of critical thinking, and it requires a kind of different understanding and sort of an application, particularly when it comes to the way that we make reports and semantic models. Again, also something that we'll see later today. So in some of the demonstrations that we'll give. So, yeah.
Thanks both of you for those, and yeah, I think it helps to set a little bit of context. And if you're both ready, we can also hop over to the screen and get started from there.
Let's go. That's good for me.
There you are.
All right. So what we're looking at here is I just have Figma open, and I'm just going to walk pretty free flow through some of the diagrams that I've put together. Some of these diagrams, like I said, are going to appear in the Microsoft documentation. It's important to state that everything that we're saying and discussing here is not representative of Microsoft's views. These are our personal views and things that we're discussing. And but the purpose is just to inform, educate, and to just have a discussion about these topics. I'm just going to walk through and explain some of these things. So starting with the very basics. So what is Copilot? Use Copilot, again, in the context of Fabric, but specifically in the context of Power BI. Well, I think the first thing that's worth mentioning is that essentially anyone, when it comes to the different personas and sort of segments of people who use Power BI, can get value from it effectively, can use it. So everybody from, for instance, like enterprise developers or self-service users, or even business users who are just consuming the things that people make. And when we're talking about Copilot and Power BI, we're referring to two specific things. We're talking about semantic models, and we're talking about reports. And again, the easiest way to kind of summarize what Copilot is, I very well agree with what Kerry said, so that Copilot is a assistive technology. So it's intended as an assistive technology to help people be more effective in their tasks and not to replace people. So Copilot, at least in its current state, of course, does not have the capacity to replace what individuals are doing. And that's not the point of Copilot. Copilot's not intended to replace an analyst or an individual report creator or a semantic model developer, or even someone who's focused on a particular task or set of tasks in that scope. Again, the thing that's intended to augment these people who are doing these tasks so that they can do their tasks better, and they can do it more efficiently, and they can just do more that they couldn't do before. And there's many examples of this that we'll give in a moment. So very high level, many different people who can use Copilot, but there's also many different Copilots in general. So there's a lot of different pilot experiences or different things you can do with Copilot. There's not one Copilot that just does everything. There's different Copilots that are in the different workloads, and there are different experiences in the workloads like Power BI. So depending on which item you're opening or using, you will interact with and use Copilot in different ways. And Copilot will also work in different ways. So for instance, you have Copilot in Data Factory with data flows, Gen 2. And then, like I said, in Power BI, you can use Copilot with semantic models, with reports. But it's also different depending on whether you're using Power BI Desktop, whether you're using Fabric with a published report or a shared semantic model, or even the Power BI mobile app. So these experiences can subtly differ in different ways. And we'll give very specific examples on how they can differ in a moment. So key takeaway here is just Copilot is different things, and there are different Copilots depending on where you are, what you're doing, and you're interacting with these different experiences. We'll give examples of those in a moment. But coming back to what is Copilot in terms of who uses it and what are they doing. So let me just get the blinking icon away here. So we could think about how you use Copilot in kind of two different ways. You have creation and you have consumption, right? When you're using BI, you might be creating things like creating semantic models, for instance, where you're, for instance, generating measured decisions. And when people are creating stuff in Power BI, models and reports, these could be, for instance, centralized enterprise developers. They could be self-service users. They could even be, centralized architects or data engineers. And And depending on who you are and what you're doing, you might be more focused on one or the other, these creation or consumption experiences. Now, a consumption experience is something that, in contrast to creation, which is helping you create or make content like a semantic model or a report, a consumption experience is helping people consume it, to be able to look at and use and explore data in different ways, in new ways, like with natural language, for instance. And this is, for instance, what people like business users are doing. But it's also something that other people as well, including, centralized developers, self-service users, anyone on that spectrum, might still use these consumption experiences. And there are experiences that don't fit into one or the other box. It's not like these are definitive categories, but this is just presenting a spectrum. For instance, DAX queries, when you're generating DAX queries with Copilot, this could be a creation experience to support your development of a semantic model, but it could also be a consumption experience for someone who's experienced with DAX and wants to explore the model using DAX by generating these queries, for example, to do validations and other things like that. So to summarize, Copilot and Power BI, there is creation experiences, there are consumption experiences. Depending on where you sit and who you are and what you're doing, you might be using more of one than the other, but it's very likely that you'll be using both. So if we want to understand, how does Copilot do this stuff? How does it work? Well, what we could actually do is walk through a Copilot process. So this is a high-level overview of what this process, and I'm going to go through it step by step. It's important to indicate two things. Number one, this is not an architectural diagram. This is a process diagram. Number two, this is still quite high level. So I'm not talking about very specific technical details in here, and we're using kind of catch-all phrases still, like pre-processing and post-processing. There are a lot of still like technical individual steps that happen. And this is also a generalization because, like I said, there might be slight differences in how certain experiences work. But again, I'll give examples of that later in a moment. So how does Copilot work? If someone is using Copilot to ask data questions of a model, of a report, if they want to generate visuals, if they want to generate DAX queries, what is actually happening at a very high level? So first of all, of course, the user is going to be providing some kind of an input. So this is step one. And the user can provide that input in different ways. They can provide the input in Fabric, for example, to a published model, a published report that they're interacting with in the browser. They could do this in Power BI desktop. And of course, they could also do it in the mobile app. So I'm just writing on the tablet here, which is not illustrated. And it's important to mention that when you're using Power BI desktop, when we're using the mobile app, that Copilot is still going to be consuming your Fabric capacity. So you require a supported Fabric capacity in order to leverage Copilot. And Copilot is not, it's not like it has like a billing cost, but it's consuming your available capacity, right? Sorry, Reid, were you going to say something?
Well, it is just a little bit of like, yes. Today it's F64. I would, looking into a magic globe, assume that at some point that might change in the future. We don't know what to, but like that's the current limitation of it. But just out of curiosity, just as a quick question, have you ever seen anything where it's actually massively spiked an F64 or higher capacity by using like a couple of Copilot queries across anything?
It's a very, it depends thing, right? Because we'll get to that in a moment, because I'll give an example of, how that cost, where that cost actually comes from, because it depends on the tokens. But it's not like, a single prompt will cause your capacity to shut down. And of course, this is a dynamic process, because depending on which model is being used and how the tokenization is being done, it will have a different impact. And it's also, there's surge protection, because this is having this is a background operation, so it's smoothened over a 24-hour period. So even if a whole bunch of people are all using Copilot all at once, that's not necessarily going to have a up and coming like present effect on your capacity, but it of course depends on what they're doing, what experiences they're using, and so on and so forth. So I haven't recently, in the last like 2 or 3 months, seen examples of where Copilot had a very strong and present effect on capacity. Prior to 3 months ago, yes, I saw examples of that. So Copilot can have an effect on your capacity like anything, it's something that you really need to think about and monitor. And if Copilot is, enabled and being used, then yeah, you will of course see that in capacity metrics app, for example. And depending on how it's being used and how many people are using it, it could, have a serious detrimental effect depending on your other workloads that you're using and so on. So, but yeah.
Just one quick last thing to mention on that is the only other difference I'd say is like, so a semantic model today, the same query plan request of a report page now, in 1 to 2 years, is probably going to take the same amount of compute. Like there's not a lot of change in terms of optimization for the semantic modeling. Maybe little bits, but like it's going to relatively remain the same. A prompt today against your fabric capacity will guaranteed cost significantly less compute as the models evolve, from OpenAI. So that's the one thing that I think is kind of unique to this is the cost per request of any Copilot prompt in any part of the system, I'm sure will continue to be less and less compute as the model gets better, compared to other parts of the Microsoft stack in terms of a much slower iterative process of improvement.
Yeah, but it's also important to keep in mind, right? Let's say you're asking data questions of your model, like your model's still being queried, right? So you're not only having the prompt, but you're still also querying your model, or you're still also doing that. So it's not like it's one or the other. It's kind of more complex than that, but definitely it is kind of something that will probably get cheaper over time. So, and I'm assuming that we'll probably also get more visibility on that over time as well. So, but we'll talk about cost a little bit more in them. So unless I was supposed to talk about it, no, I wasn't. So we're good.
No,
All right. So step one, user provides an input. So that input could be a written prompt, like we were mentioning. So you could, in the Copilot pane, and I think everybody's seen examples of this, you could write a prompt, you could send a prompt, but they could also push a button. So you could, for instance, have a button. So for example, to generate measure descriptions. And in that case, it's not like there's no prompt happening, but Copilot actually generates the prompt depending on, where you push that button and the other context. So you can basically provide input in 2 different ways, with a button or with a prompt. And once that input is provided, then that input is going to be basically given to Copilot. So that input is going to be collected. And there's several different things that are involved in that input. Of course, like the input prompts, either the one that the user provides or is created. There is the user's token, or basically who that user is, because Copilot is only ever going to give you information about stuff that user has access to, both in terms of permissions as well as data security. So Copilot will respect those things. It cannot bypass those things. And it's also going to provide the chat session history, as well as a meta prompt with what's called system metadata, which is basically like where you are, what you're looking at. Because let's say if you're on the report canvas and you're asking a question, that's relevant information for Copilot to know. Are you asking a question of the report, or are you asking a question about the model? So this kind of thing. So depending on where you are, what you're looking at, what you're doing, that kind of helps inform what Copilot is going to do and which experience is going to be used. So you cannot necessarily select a drop-down toggle and say only ask questions of a report or only ask questions of the model. That's something that Copilot is going to determine based on the input. So that's important to keep in mind when we're talking about these different experiences. Sometimes this is determined by Copilot. Of course, if you're in the DAX query view and you're using the DAX query experience, let's say you're entering a prompt there, you can only ever expect to have an output that's going to be, your DAX query that's generated by Copilot, of course. But when you're using the report canvas, then it could depend whether it's a summary or it's ask a question of a report or whether it's ask a question of the data model. It depends. So this is kind of the input that's gathered. So what happens with this input when it's given to Copilot? Well, Copilot doesn't just take that input and yeet it to, Azure OpenAI. It does some stuff with it, and this is called pre-processing. So pre-processing is basically when it's going to take your input and it's going to go and get some other context, so like grounding data, to help make the output that you will eventually get more useful and specific. So grounding, in this case, it's going to go and it's going to look at, for instance, the semantic model, or it's going to look at the report metadata, so this kind of thing. So for instance, it could look at the model or table schemas, it could look at the item metadata, and it could also look at specific data points. And that depends on what you're asking. It's not just going to go grab a whole bunch of random data, right? It's going to depend on what you're asking, and it's also going to depend on the experience you're using. So I'll give two very specific examples of this. So let's say you're using the DAX query view to generate some, queries. The DAX query view could grab some summary statistics, basically, of your model, of the relevant columns that you might be asking about, a min or a max or something like this, and then send that to, Azure OpenAI in this case. So that's an example of a data point. Another example is when you ask a data question or you ask Copilot to generate a visual, it is going to generate that visual. Let's say it's going to run a query, but it's going to send that query result back to Azure OpenAI in order to get a text or natural language summary of that particular visual. So those are two very specific examples of what I mean when I say data points in this case. So specific data points could be a part of that context. Okay. So again, I keep having this icon pop up, sorry. So once it is that context, it is going to do something called, prompt augmentation. So it's basically going to rewrite the prompt. Let's say it's not just going to take the user prompt, as is, but it's going to modify the prompt. It's going to augment that prompt to make it, to try to make it better, let's say. And then it's going to send this information, this input, to Azure OpenAI service. So this is very, very important to mention, is that this is not equivalent to OpenAI, the public service. This is not equivalent to ChatGPT in any specific capacity. It is not using any of the public services from OpenAI. This is a Microsoft managed service. So this is not a part of your Azure tenant. You cannot go in and view the configuration or change the configuration. You can't change the model that's being used, for example. You can't even, unless it's listed, in a very specific place in documentation, you can't even see which model is being used. So this is entirely managed by Microsoft, and it's something that's within, the service boundary, let's say. So it's not something that's using the public internet, that's using the public OpenAI services. So it's very, very important to mention, which of course makes it more secure. That's one of the advantages, let's say. And when that input is received by Azure OpenAI service, then of course it's going to be used by these large language models, such as, for example, the GPT series models like GPT-4 or, OI or whatever. So it's depending on what your what experience you're using, could potentially be using different models. But once it receives this input, then it's going to process it. And that process involves different things. So it's going to use a tokenizer, it's going to do embeddings, it's going to then process and produce the LLM response, basically. So now, just to mention briefly, what are we talking about when we say tokens? Well, tokens are the smallest units of information, let's say, that the LLM is using. So let's say you send a prompt like summarize this report page. It's going to break apart that prompt not into words, not into letters, but into tokens. So tokens being these co-occurring characters, and each token has a respective ID. So it might sound like we're kind of getting into the weeds, something very specific, but this is relevant to understand because the cost in Copilot is determined by the tokens. So the more tokens that are being used, both input tokens here, as well as output tokens, so the LLM response, then the higher amount of capacity that Copilot's going to use. So if you're going to send a really, really massive prompt, let's say, and Copilot is also going to grab a lot of context from a really big model, let's say, then that will be more input tokens. Whereas if you kind of restrict both of those two things, you're restricting the amount of input tokens that are being used. Of course, output tokens is not something you can control. That's something that's just produced by the LLM in this case. So, but these tokens determine what the cost is in terms of capacity. And like we were talking about, so it's not like a whole bunch of people are using Copilot all at once and there's this big burst of usage that could, let's say, throttle your capacity. Reports start getting slow, you cross the throttling limit and experience carry forward. But actually, if this was to happen, where these dots are kind of abstractly representing the utilization of your capacity because of Copilot. So Copilot is not an interactive operation like when people are using and interacting with a report, so in running queries on the semantic model, but it's a background operation. And another example of a background operation is like when you're refreshing models and so forth. So you would actually, like when this happens, it's going to be spread out over a 24-hour period, so a 24-hour window. And the purpose of that is if there's a whole bunch of people using Copilot all at once, it's going to prevent this being, this surge where it crosses the threshold. However, it's important to keep in mind, this doesn't mean that it's impossible for you to cross that limit. If this continues to happen over a certain amount of time, you can still cross it over. And if that happens, that could still happen in a broader window that you have to deal with. But this is just, some of the nuances of that cost impact, just to visually illustrate it. Okie dokie. I might need another coffee. So what happens then? So Copilot's going to receive this response from the LLM, and it's going to do some stuff with it. It doesn't just, again, like we're using the verb yeet, it doesn't just yeet that response back at you to just say like, here's what the LLM said, have fun. It's going to take that response and it's going to try to turn it into a useful output, right? And that could be limited. Like if you're generating a measure description, that's quite limited. You're just getting the description back. But if you're generating a report page, of course, that's a lot. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen there, right? Like it has to create the report page, it has to rename it, it has to apply the theme. So there's a Copilot theme and all this other stuff that happen as a part of the post-processing. But it's not just about that. It's also potentially evaluating queries. It's also potentially doing responsible AI and filtering to make sure that something inappropriate is not being sent back, whatever. At this point, it could also be doing additional calls to the LLM. So for example, I gave an example already. You ask Copilot some questions, it gives you going to give you some data back, but it also comes with this like natural language summary of what it gave you. And in order to get that summary, it's going to send the query results back to the LLM in order to generate the summary, right? So this, it's not like this is just a single input, single output process. Depending on the experience and what you're asking for, there could be multiple calls back and forth, which can be more difficult if you're trying to trace very specifically, how many tokens am I using if you're trying to understand that at a detailed level. Just a kind of heads up.
And a quick question on that. So on the whole tokenizing and calling to the Azure service, you want to pull up here. So one thing, as you mentioned earlier, is like Copilot in a lot of ways, like Fabric is an easy button for a lot of LLM stuff. Like we don't have the option of choosing 4, 4.0, 3+, or anything. It essentially just uses whatever current version Microsoft is having in the back. And so to that, I want to bring up a question, and feel free to either A, parking lot it if you're going to talk about it later, or B, answer it. But I'll read the question and then I think rephrase it to a kind of a broad and maybe easier to answer option. So let me put it up on screen. Or not this one. Here it is. Right here. And would it be better using ChatGPT or Copilot for DAX Power Query related questions? So I'll pivot that to say, like, essentially, because we have such a broad stroke model with little configurations to choose what and when, we can't choose the pre-configured models like ChatGPT does. Like, have you just found generally, like, there are times where Copilot works really well for Microsoft related questions, or has there been exceptions where, like, even though Copilot is meant to kind of work for Microsoft stuff, actually just the ChatGPT portal has actually provided better results in any way?
Yeah, so I'm answering this question in two different ways. So one, Power Query. So it's not, there is no, interpret this with a bit of nuance and grain of salt. You do not open the advanced editor in Power BI Desktop, let's say, and use Copilot to generate, M code. there are experiences for Power Query, for example, like I showed in Data Flows Gen 2. So in that context, better, there. So if you're planning on generating some Power Query code to transform data that you're going to use in a Data Flow Gen 2, Copilot will be better. And that's because, of course, there's things that are being done, guardrails that are being set up, effort that's being put in by people from Microsoft who know very, very well what they're doing and are very smart in this context and can create an experience that's going to be better tailored to what you're trying to do in that context. If you're doing Power Query for Power BI Desktop, it's going to depend. Now, part two, DAX, 100%, I think it's going to be better with Copilot. So let me tell you why. So I think it's better, and this is my personal opinion, for several reasons. Number one, so there is post-processing that's happening. So this post-processing, an example of post-processing that happens with generating a DAX query, is the DAX query is going to be run through a parser, which means that you are not going to have as likely of hallucinations as you will with ChatGPT, because it's going to make sure that DAX query runs. So with Copilot in Power BI, you should always be getting a DAX query that will run, because it's going to run it through that first. So reason number two, and reason number two is there are, again, like people from Microsoft, like I said, who are like the people responsible for the DAX language, who are ensuring that this is a functional and useful experience. And they're doing things like, for example, having a meta prompt with examples to make sure that it is producing more useful outputs. Now with ChatGPT, you have to provide the examples yourself. You have to kind of guide that context and provide kind of a meta prompt yourself. So reason number three is because you don't have to worry about dealing with the context. So when you're using ChatGPT or other LLMs, you have to set up all this stuff yourself, like choosing what part of the model you want to send through and so on and so forth. And if you're using a public service, that could be, very bad, because you're using sensitive, potentially confidential information to this public LLM tool, and you don't want to be doing that. That is bad. So don't do that. And so really, I'm freaking serious. I've seen some stuff in the last 2 months, and don't do that, please. You like fines, do it. So, and in Copilot, when you're using Copilot in Power BI, you don't have to sweat that. It's going to deal with it for you. It's going to grab that context. And you just have to focus on creating a good prompt and focusing on understanding the semantic model that you're using and what you're trying to do and how you understand DAX and how you're critically thinking. Long story short, I think it's going to be much better when you're using Copilot in Power BI, when you're trying to generate a DAX query example. So, and then with Power Query, it's going to depend on what you want to do. So,
I'll take yours to say that. So Copilot in specific places where it's meant to do one primary thing. So like general, like if you just open up your Windows and just start using the built-in Copilot and ask it DAX questions, it's not really meant for that. It's meant to do everything. But if you use DAX in the DAX query editor, that has, as you said, it has full model context. It has a lot of stuff. You don't have to give it extra information. It's secured, like, etc. So targeted Copilot that's meant to do a specific thing works very well. So I agree with what you said. And then just to quickly cap up, Kerry, do you have anything to add at all for the question?
Not for the question, but I was looking at that responsible AI thing and wondering how much that would impact the output, especially if you're dealing with health data and things. But that can
CII
parked and
well, I can unpark a very small part of it. So it's important to mention that, let's say, for example, you're dealing with some public data for public sector about sensitive topics, like, for example, violent crime, and you're analyzing statistics about violent crime for a specific domain or region. So you have some terms in your semantic model, in your semantic model metadata, that are going to be uncomfortable or offensive, referring to like violent crime and things like that. Obviously, that information potentially could be sent as part of the input to the LLM. How does responsible AI deal with that? It will reject your query, basically. You will not be able to use Copilot in that context. It will fail. It will give you an error. and it will not necessarily, to my knowledge, I could be wrong, but it will not necessarily tell you why that's failing. So if you are dealing with that kind of sensitive and confidential information, about this kind of stuff, then you probably won't be able to use Copilot. And that's actually a good segue to this point. So, and maybe just to cap up that, so indeed, Reid's talking about these individual experiences and what they're meant to do. So it's not like you should just open up the Copilot pane and just start asking DAX questions. So you should really use the DAX query view in order to do that. And you should never expect that these different experiences, like the Copilot pane in the report, will be equivalent to the DAX query view, because they work differently, right? They work differently, they do different things. I'll give more examples of that in a moment. So, but there are certainly some caveats, some considerations to keep in mind. So Copilot can produce inaccurate and low quality content. And what that means is there are some specific risks of Copilot and LLM tools as nascent technology, meaning it's a new technology. It's not like there's definitive best practices, that you should applying. People are still starting to discover these things, and we'll see examples of that. So what are some of these things that you have to keep in mind? Well, first of all, that different outputs for the same input can happen. So if I send a prompt and Kerry sends the exact same prompt and we have the same context, it can give you different information, not just because me and Kerry are different and we're different users, but also because it is a inherently non-deterministic technology, and there's not necessarily going to be like a guardrail to ensure that it's always returning the same response back. An exception, sometimes the results are cached, so sometimes it will give you the same response back. But in general, if you're sending the same prompts like every week, you could be getting a different result every week. So, depending on what you're asking. So the other thing is, like we just said, actually, that when you have scenarios where you're dealing with very sensitive information, high risk areas like healthcare, so you're dealing with data and semantic models and reports where people are making decisions that affect other people's livelihood, that affect other people's health, mental or physical, like in a hospital, let's say. So, or you really have like business critical decision making, then you should, given some of these risks and concerns, should avoid generally using Copilot, for example, and not using, for example, these ask data experiences because of some of these risks. Another important thing to mention is that Copilot, it doesn't have an understanding of accuracy or truthfulness. It's not going to tell you, how confident it is in a response, something like this. It also doesn't reason, understand your intent, or know context beyond the input and grounding data. So like we said, it's not equivalent to anthropomorphize it. It's only going to understand what it's given. And that's normal. That's what we should expect. This is more about managing expectations. So if we're going to ask Copilot something, and let's say it gives us like a DAX query back, and that DAX query works, it's got a certain pattern, it maybe defines a measure. If we change that context ourselves and it doesn't work, that's not Copilot's fault. Copilot can't anticipate how we're to use, that query or that measure, what that context is going to be outside of the scope of what we say and the context it gets from the grounding data. And the last thing is that it is limited by the scope and scale of training data. So this, perhaps the most concrete thing to understand is that these tools are based on training data, volumes of information that they've taken in order to produce these LLMs. And this is limited in scope and time. So if new DAX functions that come out, like last month, there were some new DAX functions that came out, and you're asking about those DAX functions, it would be reasonable for you to expect that you might not get as useful outputs as you would if you're asking about other functions that are going to be more prevalent in that training data. If something is sparse in the training data, there's a chance you're not necessarily going to be getting, the best outputs in that case. So it's important to keep in mind when you're dealing with novel information, then there's something that, could affect the quality and usefulness results that you get. Okay. So post-processing. So to briefly review, input comes in, pre-processing to Azure OpenAI, post-processing happens, and then finally, of course, once the post-processing has happened, then the output is returned to the user. And that's what you see when you get it back. So that's a high-level overview of this Copilot process. So we said many times, all three of us, that this it can differ depending on what you're doing, what experiences you're doing. So what do we mean by that specifically? Where can it differ and why? So it can differ basically in 4 different ways. 2 of these ways are closely related to each other. So first, input. This is very obvious. Like, of course, you are in the, generating measure descriptions, you're pushing a button. Whereas if you're generating a DAX query, you are providing a written prompt, let's say, unless you click a button to suggest measures or something like this. So depending on which experience you're using, you're providing an input. And depending on how you're interacting with Copilot, you're providing a different input. So that's the first way. The second way is closely related to the third because it's actually part of the third, and that is the pre-processing, specifically the grounding data. So Copilot gets different context depending on what you're asking and depending on what experience you're using. Now, a very specific example of this is when you're using the Ask Data experience and you're asking questions of a report or a semantic model. So let's say specifically semantic model, Copilot will not consider fields that are hidden. So if a field is hidden, it's not going to be exposed, let's say, to Copilot. But if you're asking a question in the DAX query view, to my knowledge, it is going to consider hidden fields because it might be necessary in order to, to generate the DAX query. So that's a difference between these 2 experiences, the Ask Data experience and the generate a query with Copilot experience. And there are many other examples of this. So the last way is with post-processing, and this is also pretty easy to understand. For example, different post-processing will happen. So we talked about how there's this DAX parser for the generating a DAX query, and specific to that experience. So when you're generating a report page, there's different post-processing that's going to happen there as well. So depending on which experience you're using, you will have, different stuff that gets back. And of course, the output is different, but that's kind of obvious. I don't really count that, because you're getting different stuff back, be it text or you're seeing the report page or whatever. Okay. All right. So that's it from me blasting through Figma and showing a bunch of stuff I drew in Figma. So now we're going to actually demo some stuff, like just live demo some stuff. I'll kind of pause there because I need a drink and because my cat wants into my office. So, but if someone else wants to say something while I let her in.
Sure. Let me look back at a couple of the questions here. So I did have one. I had a few that I'll just remind people of that I've queued up for the end for more of the general concept scenarios.
Okay.
If you wanted to take one related to DAX query view in Copilot, I do have one on that. But although I know that we want to be careful on targeted questions on a very specific feature of Copilot. So I'll let you decide if you'd like to just quickly see it on screen and decide if you want to answer it or not, or save it for later.
I'm not wearing my glasses, but you can try to show it on the screen and I'll squint really hard.
Yeah, so and I'm not sure I 100% understand it. So the initial question was, why are on-the-fly calculations not allowed in Copilot? When I asked for a follow-up, they referred to generating DAX is not available in the model, similar to how Enterprise GPT can generate Python. I personally didn't connect the dots on that. I don't know if you understood that in regards to the DAX query view. So we can either parking lot that or address it.
No, I'm sorry. It's maybe I need more coffee. I don't follow exactly. So, but if you maybe want to rephrase it and we can revisit it later, that would be good.
Cool,
so
yeah.
Keep in mind it's like
exactly
7 a.m. here.
Yeah, so if you can rephrase that a bit more articulately, Raj, we'll happy to parking lot it to the end if we have time for Q&A. But otherwise, yeah, we can continue on. As I just want to say, as always, Kurt, with I do appreciate your thoroughness on the slides and diagrams. I love the fact that we quite literally just got to go through a whole Figma page and just kind of moved the magnifying glass around, which is I think one of my favorite ways that I've seen you demo your stuff. So I like the low key, but also very professional way that is like combined together. Because I'm a visual learner, and some of those charts and diagrams showing like the spread of tokens and processes for computes and everything, and it's like it definitely, each time I see those, it always causes something to click in my head of, oh yeah, that makes total sense on how that works now.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I was too lazy to make slides, and I also knew that I would be too tired to remember all of this stuff. So,
I'll just mention
thought,
one last little thing just to throw like it's 7 a.m. for you, and to throw a fun meme into the mix. I saw something recently on like how to mess with your friends who use Figma, and it shows in an office a guy sitting down. Across the room is a guy, like, you know, because a Figma can be big. You usually look at a very small view of it. So he took a slide of like a horror face, and he slowly drags it over like a teeny thing on his screen, but it fills the screen on his friend, who jumps out of his chair. And like it's like, yeah, how to screw with your friends who use Figma. I thought that was pretty funny.
I had a friend. A friend did that to me actually a couple of weeks ago, where we were playing the new game Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and he was on, and then he was on my Figma, and he dragged across the screen like a picture of Henry, the main character, and it just had a text saying "I'm hungry," and like I was working, and I just see that. Anyway,
Nice. Great game also, man.
So, fantastic game, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fortuna, what is it? Fortuna. Anyway, so what was I doing? Oh yeah, so we're gonna show some stuff. So starting with generating measure descriptions. So that's one of the things you can do with Copilot is, and tell me if you can't see my screen, I'm assuming you can. You can generate descriptions for measures one at a time. You could automate this if you use like Power Automate Desktop and click through all the buttons to do it for all of them. But you one at a time, you can click on a measure and you can click this button, create with Copilot. So right now we're looking at a model to give some context. So this is a model with a certain amount of complexity. It's representative of the kind of models I typically have seen in the last 2-ish years. Multiple fact tables, many different measures, still very organized. Sorry, was someone going to say something? No?
No, sorry, I made a noise of agreement.
Yes. Noises of agreement are good. So, yeah, so it's got dynamic currency conversion, this kind of stuff, like I think quite standard. General star schema, you know, with a bit of snowflake design, like for example, here when we have, you know, the customers and regions, for example, but still very basic. So, and we have some measures pertaining to, in this case, on-time delivery. So, you know, whether things are delivered on time or not. And let's say we want to generate, there's a whole bunch of different ones for quantity, for lines. And it's a good idea that we have some descriptions for that. So we could generate those with Copilot. We push this button. I am paying for this F64 in order to do it. And then it's going to give us back, you know, calculate the total invoice value on time deliveries, where invoice document type group is string literal. That's interesting. That's interesting, actually. I've never seen that before. So I would expect it to say, yeah, I prefer string figurative. I actually thought it would say where invoice document type group is invoice, but I'm assuming that's because invoice. I don't know. That's strange. You can click try again and see if it gives a different one. No, it's going to give it. So string literal. So we can then either discard it or we can keep it. And if we select keep it, then of course you can modify it yourself, where invoice document type group is invoice. For example, I would just change this to where OTD indicator is true, and the invoice doc type is standard or express, because I have that implicit knowledge of the business process to understand. So this is one thing, like, to small comment. I like that, you know, low risk here, generate the description. As we saw, it produced an unexpected result that was strange, but you know, no big deal. I can just then modify it myself. It at least gives me an idea of where I can start. So a good example of this kind of like low-hanging fruit stuff that you can still use it for. Of course, this is one measure at a time. But maybe in the future you can do it for multiple measures, I don't know. But still, it's good that you can have an effect on the output before it's exposed to a user, for example. That's very important. So that's generating measure descriptions.
Just quick, like
Reid or
mention on that, and just three things that like I love the idea of it. One, it would be as a wish list. It'd be great is if you could edit inside of Copilot to say like, this is great, but here's how I would change it so you can train it to almost like teach it a bit better to write better ones. Two, I'm hoping that someday we get a notes option. So if you have like 85 lines of code, rather than writing a description, it could actually potentially do inline notes on like explaining what each variable is. And the third one that you already mentioned, hopefully someday we get the apply to model with maybe a prompt of like, this is going to take 15 minutes to go through your 800 measures, but we will do it for all of them. And then you can go through a checklist and just click basically which ones you would like to approve. But a multi-select description option would be really nice. I personally love the feature. Kerry, have you poked around with that one very much? I find it one of the more practical uses of Copilot, honestly.
I haven't played with that one. Mostly the quick measures.
That one's also been really nice too. It's so much better than our previous quick measures that we used to have, which was 20% cool, 80% hot garbage a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think quick measures, I'm not sure if that's something that's still available, so I don't really remember, to be honest.
Yeah, you can go to the DAX query view now.
Yeah, you're right. And so Reid, you mentioned it would be cool to have something like a notes, for example. So that's actually something you can do in the DAX query view already, is you can ask the DAX query view to add comments to your code line by line. And then it will, and then, using the DAX query view functionality, you could write those changes then to your model. So that is still possible, like within a certain scope, right? So.
Yep. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
So to change gears now, we're looking at another experience. So we're looking at something to do with a report. So I have a report here that's open. This is a thick report. It's connected to a local model in the same file, to clarify. This is a very basic report looking at, information like gross sales versus target, month to date. There's a trend, a breakdown by region, highlighting, biggest contributors to a gap, and then a breakdown by key account. So let's say one of the things you can do is you can ask for a summary. So summarize the current report page, and then Copilot will, in natural language, summarize the report page. So it will, in my opinion, take longer to read this summary than it will be to glance at the report. But, I don't know, maybe Kerry or Reid, I don't know if you want to comment on the where you see this or the context and use cases.
I'll let you go, Kerry.
Yeah, so I don't really see any use for it as a developer, but if that were landed on the page for use for end users to then read, certainly does have a use case. I do find that when I do develop reports, I need to provide both the visuals and a summary. Shorter than that, I probably wouldn't have 3 paragraphs, maybe 1 or 2 at most, of what is on the page. And it's very useful to provide context and just to meet the different audience needs. Some are more visual, some are more verbal.
Yeah, I'm actually just testing now because you made me think. I've stopped generating the response. Well, I asked Copilot. I was going to see if I could ask Copilot to summarize it more concisely, whether you can have some level of control over that or advise users. I'm not sure if that's possible. I've never tried it. Oh yeah, you can. So you can ask it. So depending on the prompt, you can ask it to summarize it in different ways. So you can get it to show in those bullet points, and then it will also highlight those visuals. So
give me one. Do one more for me. Ask it any key findings I should pay attention to.
Report page and highlight any key.
Because I don't care about a full summarization, but if Andromeda Shipyards is, as an example, 35% higher than the rest of them, where are the outliers, basically, the key findings? Perfect. Yeah, I think
I said
yep.
I extended it to say I'm a key account manager.
That's the kind of stuff there you go. Yeah. Those are the things that I find this useful for. I don't need it to summarize what the visual should be doing. Visuals are intended to summarize data, but depending on certain factors, a simple sort isn't necessarily going to call out the one you want to pay attention to. Like, you might have between your first and your second rank a massive gap between those versus the third, fourth, and fifth. So like things that are more nuanced, that are harder to notice visually, those are the things that I would find useful from Copilot, is to help me identify the hard to tell graphically.
Yeah, and I think
awesome is automatically generating the alt text and being able to review and edit the alt text before committing. That would be amazing.
Yes, you're right, and I know that, so I know that there's I think recently you would be able to have like kind of suggested or recommended questions or something like this, but that would be really cool indeed, because look at this, like at this one, this is something I want to highlight. It says that's continuous cool. Tracking and adjustments are crucial, particularly around mid-month when sales deviations can occur. So this is something actually that is categorically incorrect for this model, because sales deviations do not occur mid-month. They actually occur on the last 3 or 4 work days. In this case, Copilot is being very confident about the process, and it doesn't have the context of the underlying business process. Like I know this model very, very well, and the business process that it represents and how that business works. And this is a business where strong deviations can occur at the end of the month in the last few work days. So when it's highlighting and focusing on the mid-month where these sales deviations can occur, that's, in my opinion, a bit overreaching, because it's saying things about the business process that are not reflected necessarily in the data, or it's maybe reflected in the data for this month, but not for other months. And this is something that could cause someone to pay attention or think about things in a certain way and contract a certain bias that is not necessarily going to be helpful for their particular business process if it is not aligned. So like Kerry said,
it makes a lot of assumptions. Which I think to your point is like, you built this model, I'm pretty sure, right, Kurt?
Yep.
Yeah, you built this.
Go
ahead, Kerry.
Oh yeah, so what I would add to that is sort of thinking about what Copilot is and what it does and how it works, by asking it to summarize and highlight what the key findings are. You're asking it to think, which it can't do. But if you asked it to describe the visuals, you probably find that it's a bit more accurate because it's been trained to describe visuals. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of thinking about when you're prompting, thinking about the tool and how it works to get that better output.
And to your point, and I don't like the term prompt engineer because you're not an engineer, but the better the question, the better the response. So I think when you're more articulate about like asking specifically what it should and shouldn't do on assumptions or anything else on returning answers to you, I think it's better. I've done similar where I've noticed it kind of making assumptions and broad stroke trends on its answers on like, you should probably do this. Like, please please repeat the answer you've given to me, but also don't make any assumptions off of like, industry assumptions. This model is in this industry. Don't assume that it's similar to other industries. Like, only provide answers based off of direct data you've been given, and then it takes away a lot of these incorrect assumptions. I don't know how Copilot does that, but I've definitely seen that where it's be very articulate.
So I don't know if it's the amount of like caffeine and creatine flowing through my body right now, but like that really makes me want to go on like this crazy rant, but I won't. But that's something that I often struggle with. But like, we'll do like a mini, like a tiny, like a warm-up rant. So like that's something that I often get frustrated and disappointed with in certain contexts, even outside that when we're talking about AI and stuff like this, when you're working on a project and stuff like this, that you have, there are people who are experts in technical things who make assumptions about how the business works and the business process works. And there is this tendency for people to look at the technical representations of business processes, like with semantic models and reports. And of course, if you look at many different models and many different reports from many different organizations, you will see patterns of things that many people are doing similarly. And there might be a feeling or a tendency to think that you could kind of extrapolate that and see, well, they're all doing a similar thing. We could just take this blanket pattern and reapply it like cookie cutter process. It's not that different. But what I find is that time and time again, consultants and technical experts will overestimate the amount of cookie cutting that can be done and the amount of consistency that truly exists, and underestimate the amount of exceptions and considerations and limitations that exist in the business process because of the way the process works, the way the business works, and the way the people work. And I think that that's something that in this context that we really need to keep in mind when we see that kind of generalization happening. But that's also something we should keep in mind just as users and implementers of this technology and other technologies. We shouldn't fall into that fallacy of overgeneralizing. But at the same time, we shouldn't just assume that everything is unique. There are definitely patterns, but we need to understand kind of where the limits are here, and we need to not overreach. So mini rant complete.
Did a good job on keeping that short and succinct.
I am the worst at being concise, and I'm fully aware of that. There are people who sometimes tell me, like, I don't know if you've been aware that you are like pretty close. I know. I mean,
speaking for at least me, I don't know about you, Kerry, but like, I think 2 out of 3 of us would both identify as being individuals who are verbose and can platter on quite a while on a topic without realizing it.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I'm very, very concise and direct and to the point.
I love that.
You can keep us in check then.
And very blunt on occasion as well.
Oh, but bluntness is the best. I hate it when people beat around the bush. I hate it.
I have a massive appreciation for people that will talk to me directly. I really do.
Yeah. I have in my D&D group, I've played D&D with these fellas for over 10 years now. And like when things are just like kind of going off the rails or something, like they'll just be like, Kurt, like this is not, no. Just be like, okay. And I can appreciate that. Like if that's also capable of happening, like I love that. Darkness is fantastic in feedback in every way. Anyway, summarizing report pages, going back on the rails a little. So what was I going to do next? We're going to go to the DAX
question from a great suggestion from the audience, just to keep it interactive for people there. If you can go back to that page and just throw a quick question onto ChatGPT, can you ask it to suggest a good visual that would enhance the page? Just curious to see what it would throw up.
He suggest a good visual that could enhance this report page. So again, I'm tempted to have a mini rant, but I won't. So that I think this is something that this type of question requires so much context that asking this question without that context is, I wouldn't say dangerous, but it is a recipe for trouble with a capital, because you're not providing the context of what is the purpose of the report page. You're not providing the context about who's using it. You're not providing the context of what people are trying to get out of it in terms of actions and decisions. Now, we could provide that context. But that would be a pretty lengthy prompt. And it's 7 a.m. and I'm very lazy at the moment.
Exactly. But, like in summary, essentially, like we haven't defined what is good. We haven't defined what is enhanced. We haven't defined what metrics we care about. So like the more vague the question, the more vague the answer.
Ooh. Here's the suggested donut.
At least it wasn't a pie chart. I will say I like donuts better than pies, but it wasn't a pie chart.
Yeah.
But we have a donut chart.
So here, this is what it's recommending. Key account name by the sales. I don't know,
just
bro.
Like, just for sake of sanity, so quickly put that back on and just show how much better that looks as a freaking bar chart. Like, because it does. It just looks 1,000 times better. And I try to show people all the time, like anytime anybody ever has one of these, I just insta turn it into this and just tell them like how much better does this bar visual look, and I get nods of agreement 100% of the time.
So we could meme on this pretty hard, right? Like, but but again, to be fair, it's not like Copilot, like we can use this to just say like, oh, Copilot's bad. I'm not gonna like, launch into a rant about that. But again, we didn't provide the context, right? Like we didn't say what would be good, what would be effective. We didn't say what the point was, what we're trying to get out of it.
We did
the more
say
context,
good visual,
the more...
though.
True.
We did give it the word good, and it still gave us a pie chart.
But a pie and donut is not necessarily bad. I wrote an article about this.
I still
It's
use
not
them,
bad.
but you don't want one when you have 30 categories.
Yeah, so I'll give you, so Copilot should understand, and I would expect as a naive user, I would expect Copilot to have a certain understanding of data visualization practices such that if a column has a high amount of, categories or whatever, that a part of whole visual like this, might not necessarily be the best way to represent the data. So instead it would be more, I would expect that, honestly, especially this is a data visualization tool. We're in the data visualization context. We're asking a data visualization question. I will give you that. So again, I think that we as users could do a better job by giving specificity and context. And
give it a thumbs down. No. Yeah, we can help right now. Thumbs down.
Thumbs down. So
too many categories for a donut chart. There you go. We have helped train the assistive tool.
There we go. Submit. We contributed. Cool. We contributed.
Yes.
I did my part.
The live stream has now been worth it. We contributed.
Yeah. Okie dokie. What was I doing again? Oh yeah, we're doing the DAX query view now. So I love the DAX query view, and the DAX query Copilot is also my favorite Copilot experience, and I like it a lot. So what we're going to do is we generate a DAX query. So I have some pre-selected examples here because again, it's the morning, I'm lazy, and generate a query to show the total order lines by customer for August 2022 and the Laconia 2 territory. Bonus points. Does anyone know what Laconia is a reference to?
Mass Effect?
No, The Expanse.
Oh, okay. I mean, I've read most of the books, so I'm ashamed that I don't remember. Remind me, which planet was Laconia?
I don't want to give spoilers for people who haven't seen it.
I mean, like it's old hat at this point. It's been off the air for like 5 years. The books have been done for a while.
But it's still amazing. And homework for anyone. So if you want to become a master of Power BI, step 1 is you have to watch The Expanse on Amazon Prime. All right.
Better say no. So if you want to be a master of Power BI, you have to read The Expanse. Read The Expanse.
Yeah, fair. One or the other. I will not mentor you until you have done this as a prerequisite. So,
it is one of the best sci-fi shows of all time.
It's fantastic. It's amazing. Yo, when it ended, they had like all the, I don't even care if I'm going off the rails on this topic, but all the props of the events were available on an auction. I was like this close to blowing a amount of money on like Amos's suit. I was this close. I was this close to like my wife kicking me out of the house for that.
But then you can have that thing that's hanging in your foyer.
Right here. It would have been right here. I sometimes like have nightmares where I like wake up and I'm like in the checkout of the auction and then I close and then I'm like, biggest regret of my life.
Cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. So all right, we did a query. We generated a query to show the total lines by customer for August 2022 in this territory. So let's run through what we got here. So first of all, I love this. It provides the prompt at the top as a comment. So even if you keep the query, and again, it asks you whether you want to keep the query. You can run the query. So we can go ahead and run the query. So if you keep it, you still have a reference to that prompt. I love that because it's traceable, it's transparent. It says, hey, this was AI generated. This was the prompt. I love it. So other thing is that we have the query here. We have some filters. I'm going to zoom in a bit more. We have some filters. We have the query then down here where it's applying those filters and it's getting the customer sold to name. Now imagine, imagine like I'm doing this for the real lives, and I said by customer, and Copilot opted for customer sold to name. Maybe in my mind, when I say customer, I'm actually referring to the account name, for example. So that's possible. So how would you deal with something like that? That's where things like synonyms can come in. So you can add to the customer account name field a synonym or a description to specify that when someone says customer, they're typically referring to the account name and not the sold to, since the sold to is more of like a technical, system level, especially if you have like multiple SAP systems or something. Whereas here it's account name is something more on a business level. So, but still, this is the query is functional. We can run the query, we get the result. Good, right? So that's one example. So let's do another example. Let's do an example where we define a measure. So, I'm going to change the prompt a bit on the fly. Oopie-doopie. So define a measure that will compute the average difference in hours between the request goods receipt date and the ship date of an express order. Show this measure by customer key account name. So what we're doing here is we're looking at the difference in hours between when the customer wants stuff delivered and when it's actually delivered. So when I submit this prompt, so this is like, we could be exploring the data. We're looking into like demand planning issues or something. I don't know. So we're running this prompt. We're running it in the same window here. Oh, it's very zoomed in now all of a sudden. I want to like make this a bit smaller. Okay, so what's happening? So we have a measure that's being defined in line with the query. So this measure is not created in our model yet, but it's something that's just defined for the scope of this query. And it's giving us this code for the measure. It's filtering the orders table for the sales order document type code equals express order. It's doing a date diff between the ship date, request goods receipt date by hour. Okay, so let's run this. And we see that it's empty, it's blank. Okay, so what is going on here? Well, again, we didn't tell Copilot what we mean by an express order. Now, Copilot tried and it said, okay, sales order document type code is express order. But if we actually look at the orders table, and then we go to the sales order document type code, which is somewhere here. So sales order document type code, this is a code, right? There's nothing express orders in here, right? So, and again, it's a hidden column, but it's still being considered in the DAX query view to highlight something I said before. So express order doesn't exist in that context. So we could specify the code, or we can try to specify what an express order actually is. So let's start a new query because Copilot is going to remember our chat history for this context. So let's start over and we'll give it a different prompt that's a bit more specific. And we'll say, define a measure, copy and paste these. Define a measure that will compute the average difference in hours between the request goods receipt date and the ship date of an order, filtered to the order document type text of standard order or express order, let's say. So show this measure by customer key account name. So now if we run that, I would expect that the result that we get will be more specific, more useful. So, and again, I got kind of go up here. So, okay, so it's doing calculate average date diff, and then it's doing the order document type text equals express order, just like I asked it to. And now if I run it, then I get a result. So, and I might want to swap the ship date for the request goods receipt date, but I can proceed here. And then I can also use this as a measure. Just, it's important to keep in mind that, you know, Copilot doesn't know the context in which I'm going to use this, right? So that's important to keep in mind. So let's do one last final example. Actually, no, I didn't want to do that. Ah, darn it, I should have kept it. So now let's just enter the same thing because I wanted to actually show two things. Because you can't just generate, you don't have to just generate DAX queries. You can also ask it things with this query. So I want to show, for example, you can say, explain this query. there was also a button you could push to do that. So you can have like a conversation with it. So, and then it explains what the query is, how it does. It gives you a breakdown down here in this kind of drop-down box. But to what I said earlier, you could say, add comments to each line of the query to explain what that line does or what its purpose is.
That's what I.
So it's going to then, yeah. And you can even ask it to do that in another language. So, okay. So this is something that it does it in this output box here. It doesn't do it up here. So
I was wondering if you would do a few too many. It literally comments on the calculate function. So every function gets almost a description. I'm sure there's a way to prompt it to give you the right level, like only explain full measures, variables, or something like that. But like I do like that it does it. I didn't realize you could actually do that in here because I haven't used this that much.
You can also do it to do stuff like replace variables or whatever, or something like this, or I don't know, it's like stuff like that is possible. So, but what's cool is, okay, so Copilot is something like your prompts should be in English because the training data is mostly in English, right? However, it can still do things in other languages. So let's say I'm in Belgium, I'm in Flanders, I speak Flemish. So I can say in Dutch, then in Flemish, I can say, verwijder alle comments en toevoeg. I'm going to translate this. Nog comments in Nederlands. So I'm originally from Canada, so verwijder alle comments en toevoeg nog comments in Nederlands. So I'm basically asking it to delete the comments and then add comments in Dutch. Voor elk lijn. So, and it will actually add comments in Dutch, or it should, I expect it should add comments in Dutch to the code. So you see here that it changed now from English to Dutch. So I have Dutch comments in here. So that is something that you can try. You just have to make sure that anytime you make a change like this, especially when you're kind of going into the weeds and doing something that like, it's not recommended necessarily that you prompt in other languages. But you need to make sure that it doesn't change other parts of the code that you didn't expect it to change. So that's something that you can technically do. Yeah, so, but it's important to keep in mind that since in general, it's advised that you prompt in English, this can be a challenge for users, right? Because then if users are not native English speakers, then that can be a challenge to come up with the appropriate prompt. Okay, so we're going to do one last bonus round, and then we're going to do 2 quick demos. So generate a query that will show me the total late orders for government contracts in the territory of Laconia again. So I'm asking it to show me the late orders here. So it's been able to figure out that government contracts is B2G. It's been able to do Laconia, and it's been able to filter to euros. So great. And then it's doing this here, but it's grabbing the late delivery penalties. So there is no late orders measure. And I also didn't tell it how to calculate that. So this is something that this is what I mean when it comes to like, you need to think critically. It's not just about making changes to your model, but it's also about, thinking about how are things named and thinking about, okay, maybe if I first made a measure that was late orders or open orders, then this would make sense. So that's the DAX query view, some demos for the DAX query view. I'll pause there very briefly, and then I'm going to show 2 short demos with one with asking data questions and one with generating a report page. Okay.
I don't think there's any other targeted questions that we have other than some general ones left at the end. Just a couple of other comment on seeing what we've had and wants for like, hopefully someday we get the DAX query view and a few query plans and a few other things like that. I still wonder like the amount of integration of that now that Darren actually works for the guy who created DAX Studio, who now works directly for Microsoft, and wondering if that will just stay kind of kept in DAX Studio or not.
I don't know.
Oh yeah, so, exactly. It's the hands up. Go ahead, Kerry.
Yeah, I was going to say, how much effort is required in terms of going through the model and putting synonyms through and making sure that it's.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for saying that. I forgot to talk about that. A tremendous amount of effort. So it is not trivial to go from a semantic model that you've been using for a couple of years and then a semantic model that, you know, is Copilot ready, let's say. There are significant design decisions that you have to make in order to get your model to work well with Copilot. Some of these things are things that you should, quote unquote, be doing anyway, like adding descriptions to measures, having good naming conventions, these kind of things. But the kinds of descriptions you're going to make and the kinds of naming conventions you're going to choose for, and what you're going to hide and what you're not going to hide in the model, all of these decisions are going to be slightly different when you're doing it in order to ensure your model works better with Copilot versus when you're trying to just organize your model for other humans. And adding synonyms is a tremendous effort sometimes, because you, for example, here I have all these synonyms. So I've added a lot of synonyms to this model, a lot. And you can do it here when you're in the model view, but it's not just synonyms, right? Like to go modeling, I click here, the Q&A. So synonyms, so I can't like search fields or something. I can ask Copilot to generate or suggest some, but I having to go through each one of these and toggle it on or off, which is the same as hiding it and adding the synonyms, that takes a lot of time. And also relationships, you know, thinking about relationships, things like prepositions, things like verbs and so on. That's something that is also not trivial to think about. Like that's a kind of different muscle that you're using in your mind. Is again, especially if you're not an English speaker, this is hard. And so, yeah, it's a lot of effort, and you still have to make a good semantic model. So it's not like this is taking the place of other effort that you would take to make a good semantic model. You should be making a good semantic model anyway. If anything, you should be making a better semantic model if it's using Copilot, because Copilot is much more likely to produce not useful and misleading outputs if your semantic model isn't well put together. So it needs to be following good modeling conventions anyway, plus you have to put all this extra effort in to make sure that it works well with Copilot. So yeah, it's tremendous, it's a lot. So to answer your question again, very verbosely, like I always do.
No, I appreciate it.
So I'm going to demo that actually, because so let's say we're now in Fabric, we're using a published report. So let's say we're a business user and we're going to be doing some questions to our report and our model. So I always recommend that if people are doing this, either you or someone else, you always advise yourself or someone else to start with a basic question that's easy to validate with the report on hand. So we're going to start with something very basic. What was the turnover for August 2021 in euros? So send. So now Copilot is going to work on it and it's going to give us a response. And it says here, showing the month-to-date turnover. So that's the correct measure, where date is in August 2024 and date is in 2021. Now, obviously, those two things are mutually exclusive. They can't exist at the same time as filters. So you get something that's blank, also not filtering to euros. So, okay, so where would you start if you had to troubleshoot this? Like you might look at the semantic model, make sure you don't have multiple date tables. We don't. Make sure that you add synonyms. We do. For example, turnover and gross sales are equivalent. And you might start to tell the user, okay, be more specific in your prompts, say what you want, kind of things. However, in my testing, what is going to produce the best result to get the correct filters is by adding one word, total. So what is the total turnover for August 2021 in euros? I don't know why it's filtering to August 2024. I have no idea. So, but when I say, what is the total turnover? Now it's filtering to August 2021 and it's filtering to euros, nothing about 2024. And I can validate this in the report by selecting 2021. And we see that we have the correct number here, so it's a correct result. So that's demonstrating that seemingly small, innocuous changes to our prompt, like just adding the word total, can have significant and functional impacts on the result that you get back. And it's important to think about this not only when you're using Copilot, but when you're advising people in terms of constructing their prompts. Don't just give them advice like be more specific, use verbs, whatever. You really have to think like linguistically, and you have to think sometimes like quite out of the box. Because even changing a preposition like for August 2021 to in August 2021, that can also produce a different result. So this is just the kind of thing you need to think about. Again, this doesn't mean that like Copilot is bad necessarily. Like, yeah, it's weird that it's filtering to August 2024. I wouldn't expect it to do that, and I don't know why it's doing that. But at the same time, this is again like this is a nascent technology. This is something very new, and that we need to think about it in new ways, like thinking about these linguistics. And again, this is super hard if you're not like a native English speaker. So that's something important to keep in mind.
And also American English as well.
Yeah.
On that point, because I find that quite difficult because, you know, I use cumulative sums, and I find that Americans tend to use running totals more than cumulative sums and things like that. So that can be quite difficult.
No, that's perfectly correct. So 2 quick things, and then we're going to jump to creating a report page. So these will be very quick. So one thing that I will tell you that I like a lot, that is a new thing. So this is, in my opinion, and Kerry and Reid, tell me if you think differently, I feel like this is more of an exploratory experience. People are asking questions in natural language. They're intending to explore the data by talking to it. So they have recently added this button, explore this visual. And if you click on it, you can use this as a starting point, and then you can grab other fields from the model and create a visual and explore that data, either as a matrix or as a visual. So I could add, for example, like the key account name, for instance. And I actually really like this because it's putting you, the user, in the driver's seat, so that you don't have to write more prompts in order to explore the data, which in my opinion is inefficient. And it's let you get a kind of like visual exploration, either in tables and matrices, if that's what you're comfortable with, or as a visual. So, and that is something, that is a change that I actually like quite a bit, because this I do feel is an exploratory experience. Sorry, Kerry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I thought you were pausing. Yeah, no, that's the first time I've seen that, and I really like that.
Yeah, so I like this a lot.
Because it's better than going to explore this, you know, the data explorer in Fabric, right? This is better than going to the data explorer in Fabric because you start from a context.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So I like this a lot. So I think that this...
Save these visuals? Yes, you can save it. When does it save?
You can save it, and then it saves it to, you know, a workspace and so on. I haven't explored so deeply, you know, whether you can change where you save it and all these things. So I don't want to talk about it because I haven't dived into it enough myself, but you can save it like you would as an exploration. You can save it as an exploration, or I think you can also save explorations as a new report with just that one visual. So I really like this as a way to start exploring the data. Again, like you say, from the context. So yeah, it's this is the direction that I think these kind of experiences should be moving toward. This is very logical, and it helps contextualize the why. Like, why would someone do this? To explore data. So yeah. So yeah, last thing I'm going to show. So imagine I am a business user. We are all business users. We're looking at this report. This report is about gross sales. There's no sensitive information in here. It's just about sales. And let's say the semantic model developer is fairly new to Power BI. They created this. They just think like, okay, I gave you access to this report. There's other stuff in the model, and you can ask questions of the model, but you're only going to be able to ask questions about stuff that's in the report. False with a big goal, capital F. So imagine I am a user who's a bit cheeky, and I know that we use sales versus budget to calculate the bonuses for salespeople. And I'm just like being a smartass, and I'm just going to be like, show me all of the employees. And we'll see if, I don't even know if employees is in there. So, and then indeed, So it turns out there's an employees table that's being used that's not shown in this report, but it also doesn't have RLS or OLS, so data security. It's not hidden. So it's fair game for Copilot. So I can be even worse, and I can say, what is the salary for Anita Gibson? And I don't even know if there's salary information in here, but it looks like there is. So I can see incredibly confidential information because it's not appropriately protected. So because the semantic model developer made an assumption, the assumption is you can only access fields that they expose in the report. That is a false assumption. Because if I can ask questions of the data model and that data model contains sensitive information that is not appropriately protected, then I can ask questions about that sensitive, unprotected information. So this is something that's very important to keep in mind. This is not a security flaw of Copilot. This is an oversight of the semantic model developer. And to be honest, I would empathize with the semantic model developer in this case, because they did not get a warning that that's something that can happen. You know, logically speaking, if they thought about it, to understand that if you can ask questions about a data model, this is in the data model and it doesn't have data security, but still, this is like a new technology, a new tool. This is why you need to be critical. You need to think critically and be skeptical about these kind of technologies, to think about these kind of things that can happen before it happens to you. And you get freaking fired because of something like this, because you just trusted it, because you were open-minded and didn't think about this before you just did something. It's very important to think critically about these things. So, and again, this is not the fault of Copilot, 100% not. So, but again, I can also understand how someone can make that mistake, but don't make this mistake. If you have sensitive information in your semantic model, protect it. Do not assume that, you know, people can't access it. It's the same with publish to web. If you publish a report to publish to web, people can anonymously access your semantic model and query other fields that you're not exposing. So I'm not going to demo that, but I could. I could. Maybe later, next live stream. We'll talk more about the expanse in that one. So that's asking data questions. So now we'll do one last, we're going to generate a report page. So we're going to generate a report page about this on-time delivery metric. No, Copilot's not cooperating. Here we go. So in Copilot, so you can generate, you know, when you're asking a data question, it's creating a visual. You can add that visual on the page. So technically, that's generating a visual as well. So that's how you generate like one visual. But you can also generate a new report page. So I'm going to start from a blank page because I don't like the context of the existing report page. I already have some visuals and I have a theme applied. So Copilot will not apply the Copilot theme. Otherwise, if this is a blank new report, it will apply the Copilot theme. If you want more information about that, I've written about it on my blog, but the Copilot theme is something that, you know, comes when you create a report page. It's not generated by Copilot. It's not an AI generated thing. It's a resource that's applied. You can export it and you can apply it to new reports if you like it. But in this case, I already have a theme, so it's going to use my theme. I like that it does that. So we're asking it to generate a report that shows the total on-time delivery, or OTD, in percent for lines, value, and quantity. Show the totals, then a trend for each. Beneath the trends, show a breakdown by customer key account name. So I'll explain to you what I expect as a user. So what I expect is that it's going to create a report that, I don't know where my mouse is anymore. Where is it? Here. It's going to create a report with the title somewhere, and then it's going to create like some cards. So let's say lines, quantity, and value for on-time delivery. I'm asking it for customer key account name. So it has like a breakdown by lines, quantity, and value. And then I'm asking it for a trend for each. Show the totals and then a trend for each. So actually this should be the trend. And then beneath that, then it has a breakdown by like the customer key account. So that's kind of what I'm expecting. That's what I have in my head, let's say. And let's see, you know, whether it does that. So send. So it's going to take that prompt. It's going to generate the report page. And then we'll see what we get. So now it's showing me what it's doing. I will create a report page, da 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 da. So in this case, if you don't like what it says, you can hit cancel. So I like that you don't have to waste unnecessary time. It's not there. It keeps that. So this is the result, and let's examine the result. So first of all, I can't see the title. I can't see the cards. Again, this is because it's using my theme. It doesn't know about my theme. It doesn't know the formatting settings I've put as default in my theme. So it doesn't know that like the configuration for the layout it's using is not valid for my theme, is not useful. I would have to now manually adjust that myself. So the other thing is I asked for it to have trend breakdown, trend breakdown, trend breakdown. So it didn't do that. And the other thing is that it does make this layout of card, thing 1, thing 2. So that's good. So that's I'm glad it does that. But then it's also like, not lining it up the way I expect. Lines, and then we have value. So here we have lines, here we have quantity. So this can be a bit confusing. And then if it's using the Copilot theme, it could also confuse the colors so that you get certain colors that are being chosen that are quite jarring. So this is the report page creation experience. You can then ask it to make changes, but it's a bit limited in terms of what changes it can make. And yeah, so that's that. So I'll leave it to Kerry, to you, or Reid, if one of you want to jump in and elaborate or explain your thoughts or whatever, so I can drink something.
I can't read it.
What was that, Kerry?
I can't read it. No, as in like I can't read the information in it. So OTD % lines trend. My brain can't interpret what that means.
Yeah.
Like OTD % lines by customer key account, and then OTD % lines by key account name.
Is there a hierarchy in that one or no? Because there's key account and customer in the same visual.
It's a good question. No, it's just using one column, the column I asked it to use, and then measure. That's it. There's no hierarchy.
Interesting. I'm curious why it has customer account in the title then, because that doesn't. It has key account name in there, but it doesn't have customer key.
I think it's saying customer key account because that's like a synonym, and it's in the customer table. And here it's using the it's using like the actual. I think like it's not designed to work with subtitles maybe. So here it's using the default subtitle with a custom title that's applied by Copilot, I'm assuming, perhaps. Okay. But I'm just kind of guessing. So yeah. So I don't know. So I think, yeah. So I don't know. Sorry, Kerry or Reid, if you have comments or thoughts.
Can you remove the chop shadows?
A lot of it is just kind of getting curious about the way it designs and labels stuff. It gets things very far. I think it does a decent job of a data density where it doesn't add to a lot of density. But I think when it adds this level of information, it definitely requires a bit of like combing and figuring out exactly what isn't valuable, what makes sense with a lot of this stuff. But like it just still impresses me on how far something like this can get, where you can go from nothing to this, especially for somebody who like, I just opened Power BI for the first time today. Yeah, I mean, but about it, right? Like, so yes. So I'm happy it doesn't do things I didn't ask it to do. I'm happy it doesn't, when I ask it for key account, for example, it doesn't add like product type. So I'm happy it doesn't have like that kind of level of hallucinations, or like it's not adding that kind of gruesome donut chart. So I'm happy about those things. But that's like really very low expectations. So again, I'm not trying to be negative, but I'm just trying to think critically here. What I would have actually liked and preferred is that if more time and effort was put in creating templates. So if you just had a template like this with just the empty visuals laid out on each other, like with the trend obviously moved up, and you had some way to access these templates, like let's say you have a tab here called templates, layouts, and you could just select from a drop down like you can with themes. So like how I can select themes here, and I could just choose layouts, and then it would apply a theme, it would set the layout, and then I could add my data fields. In my opinion,
that is giving me the exact same value as what I'm doing here. So, and if anything, that's giving me more control and agency over what I'm choosing. And it's also not assigning fields to the visual. So, and I think like the lift templates that we can get and do in Power BI in general is something that I would have expected to see more happening in the last few years. To be honest, like, I don't know, I would rather have like a way to templatize visuals and a way to select and add templates. Imagine if you could have like organizational templates even. So, and again, that's not like, I'm not saying this is bad, right? Like, I'm not saying, I just like have a hard time understanding we don't need AI to get templates. So, but I can understand how this is like, you know, this is impressive, like, especially if you don't know that much about visualization. And sure, yeah, like it can give you a good starting point, especially if you really know nothing about the user interface. But, you know, if you really are interested in making reports, then I think that that's something that you're going to need to invest in learning. And like something that I really think is important is that I believe, my personal opinion, one of the reasons why I think Power BI and Tableau, why these tools have been so successful with this bottom-up success from the business and from average people, one of the reasons why they've been so successful is because people like creating reports. People like that. Like, there is nothing cooler than seeing like, you know, Philip from finance or like Susan from you know, customer service, like busting out Power BI, and then after a week they create something and you see it on their face how happy they are and how proud they are of like the fact that they did it and they created something. Is it like the best report and is it following all the best practices? Like, who cares? Like, they did something that they found interesting and useful and they were able to get value from, and that triggers something in people, and that's how
creative process.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we love being creative. It's, you know, we like carpentry, we like, you know, building games, we like, you know, doing creative things, and building reports is one of those things that we take great joy out of. And you know, when to deliver a really good report that answers somebody's questions and they are excited, you're excited. It's one of those things as well. And I can't keep looking at that screen. I'm sorry. Can you minimize that, please?
Yeah. Sorry. I'll go back. So no, it's cool. So and again, like, I don't want to overgeneralize, right, and say that everybody loves getting reports and everybody wants to do data visualization and whatever. No, that's not what I'm saying. So I know that some people like don't give a flying stuff about you know, visualizing the data, and they just want to answer the question and go back to their job. I get it, 100%, I get it. But there are definitely like a significant amount of people that do feel that way. And I can understand that for the people who really don't want to create a report, like maybe this can be interesting, but I actually think the Ask Data experience is much more catered to those people because they just want to explore their data. They want to ask the question, get the result, do an exploration. They don't need to make the report if they don't want to. So if they don't like creating reports, why would they use AI to create the report? You know, like the people who are going to create the reports are the people who, you know, ultimately like either have to or will get some kind of enjoyment out of it. Again, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to overgeneralize. Yeah. So, and I just think like, I don't know, if I'm perfectly honest and being a little bit unfiltered, like that's kind of part of what makes me a little bit sad sometimes with a lot of this technology is it's being used in domains and applications where humans inherently, like Kerry said, can express their creativity and take intrinsic enjoyment out of what they're doing. And I feel like it's kind of retracting away from the agency from people in that regard and kind of stealing that joy to some extent. And I think that makes me sad because I think like there are plenty of ways that it could add joy. Like if it could reduce the amount of effort I could put into formatting, if it could let me like cycle through formatting options or things like that, I think there's definitely opportunities for it to augment the process. And I think that's what, you know, that Microsoft wants to do is they want to augment the process. But I just question whether this report creation, whether that's like the appropriate avenue to do that. It also seems it's so big as a scope, like creating a report page, creating a good report page is hard, man. So it's
right up hard, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, man.
It's art and science, left brain, right brain that goes into it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's everything I had to show. So I'm done showing stuff. So that yeah. We went way over time, but
it was fun, and the little mini tangents and soapboxes I'm sure are appreciated by the audience. People like to hear candid conversations on this kind of stuff. You know, it's a bit of the like marketing, so to say, of like what's cool, but also like, hey, you know, here's our words of caution and some of this stuff. So I think it's continuously appreciated every time I've ever had a stream that I think goes a little off cuff and is aggressively honest on opinions.
Yeah, and I think like this, like I said at the beginning, like, okay, yes, I'm a very verbose person. I'm sorry, but like this is such a massive topic. It's so hard to talk about like in a very limited sense, because it's important to give people, like, you can't just enable Copilot for the DAX query view. You can't. There's no tenant setting for that. If you enable Copilot for Power BI, you enable Copilot for Power BI, right? So so all the kit and caboodle, like all these different experiences. So when you're going to talk about it, you really gotta like let people know this is what we're talking about. Like, this is the full scope and extent of what we were dealing with here, and it's a lot. So
yeah, and that's an interesting thing as well, right? Because so the developer experience, right? So as a developer, it's part of our roles that we check and we validate, you know, the measures and the outputs. And so, you know, using Copilot and it's not coming out right, we do that all the time. We're always troubleshooting and making sure and reconciling data and stuff like that. But the end user experience is something that, you know, I would personally want to turn off. So if I did want to use the Copilot as part of the development experience, I wouldn't want it from the end user experience, because they can't validate. They don't know the model. They don't understand what's behind it. They can't see it. And so they can't have that same criticality over the output. And then that might create an over-dependence and an over-reliance on technology that we as developers can't see. So we're enabling this self-service, but no control over what they're going away and you know, taking away with that. So that's a bugbear, I think, for me personally, in terms of not being able to switch off individual experiences of Copilot. And if I want to get the benefit of it, I have to then take the disbenefits along with that.
Yeah,
I mean,
turning it on or off per person for like an Active Directory group and or like individual places, I think would be a welcome next step for that, to be able to do slow rollouts and not just literally like, hey, everybody, here's access to this potentially very expensive, very nuanced, and often occasionally incorrect thing, depending on how you ask stuff. So it's very useful, but it's like giving a kid an adult toolbox, you know, at the age of 8, if they're exploring stuff. They can make a lot of beautiful things with it, but they could also they could hurt themselves if they're not careful on how to use the tools.
And that's so if it's switched on, right, and then Microsoft suddenly releases a new experience, it's automatically enabled, and then you're suddenly, as a consumer, chasing, trying to understand what it is, what it does. You know, is there going to be data leakage? You know, is it safe for us to use? And you have to chase that. You know, so for example, with the user experience thing, if you, as a developer, you know, you're using it well, but if that new user experience was suddenly enabled, and you've got this whole backlog of 500 reports that haven't been developed in consideration of that, you know, the perspectives of the row level security, you know, that's a massive thing as a consumer that you know, have to play catch up with. So it's interesting.
And it's important to keep in mind too the training overhead here. And again, like these aren't like, some of these are not necessarily specific comments about Copilot, but like when you are deploying Power BI in your organization in general, right? That's the whole theme about like the adoption roadmap. Like there are certain steps and actions and considerations that you must take in order to have successful adoption. Like you want to have successful adoption of Copilot, of course, because you want people to not just use it, but use it effectively and get value from it, to not be misled or make bad decisions or take bad actions because they've used it wrongly, or because the tools that they're using are not prepared to support a Copilot experience. So that requires a significant amount of training. So you're going to have to train users about prompts, about the technology, to set their expectations and to think critically. And, if they're going to use a significant and large and complex semantic model to ask data questions, they need to know, like, what is in that semantic model? What can I ask about? What can I not ask about? If they just kind of like fire a shotgun into the void, they're either going to get frustrated or they're going to stumble on something that's confusing. And that's not a guarantee. That's just like probability. So you have to invest effort, human effort into training people so that they can make good use of these tools and adopt them and get value from them in their organizations and really get efficient. And it's the same when people creating these things. Like, you have a lot of people who are more, bottom-up business analysts or self-service, whatever you want to call it. Like, the people who are creating semantic models, who are using these experiences to support their creation, and they're also going to use the consumption, like, for them, the training effort is even more, because you have to tell them about all these things you just mentioned with the linguistic modeling. And a lot of these people are just struggling with the basics of semantic modeling, like getting in a date table and making sure the star schema is there and that you're performing and all this stuff. Like, those issues don't go away once you add Copilot on top of it. There's this whole additional stuff that you need to think about. And again, that's not saying that you shouldn't use Copilot or you can't use Copilot. Some more granular control would help to like narrow it down. Like, the amount of training you have to do to get someone to like generate measure descriptions is like none. But still, like, in general, there needs to be some kind of effort there, like it needs to be thought about. It needs to be considered. You can't just flip a switch and expect gold to fall out of the sky. You know what I mean?
But that would be nice if it did.
Yeah, it would be awesome. I could like just spend all my time in the gym and not work anymore.
You'd become the ultimate gym bro.
Oh, no.
There's a little bit of a sparkle in your eye when I said that, just a teeny tiny bit.
Yo, I love lifting heavy things, but I don't really like gym bro culture.
just personified in a D&D character where your alter ego can be like gym bro barbarian.
Yeah, gym bro. We still gotta like talk about the prospect of D&D streams. That reminds me.
Oh, it will happen. For people curious, just as a quick mention, at some point, I'm hoping to do a live stream on this channel with Kurt and a few others who are interested in essentially streaming a live Dungeons and Dragons D&D session, kind of like little mini campaign where we all get to play a character, similar to Critical Role for anybody that knows of that. So hasn't been planned, but we hope someday to do it.
Copilot can be a character. Copilot can be a character.
I mean, ChatGPT has that voice narration where it can interact with you. I've seen people use it in sessions before, where you could talk to it as an NPC.
We did that actually in our D&D campaign. So one of the ways that I explored generative AI last year is we set up a solution, quite a complicated solution, to have basically like ChatGPT, you could say, playing a character in our D&D campaign, say. So, and where it would make all the decisions and it would choose all the dialogue, and I would have it read dialogue using a voice to text or text to voice. And we had voice to text, giving it the context of what other people were saying. But the funny thing is it got upped in a loop. And when it was negotiating with the players, somehow it got off the rails, like so hard off the rails, where it started treating it like an interview, like a job interview. And it started really like giving salary expectations and stuff, like in American dollars, and it just went, and then it just got stuck, and then we couldn't get it out of this like I'm an HR interviewer persona, so it broke. So we only used it for 3 weeks, and then it was fun. So.
All right, digressions aside, we're at the 2-hour mark, so I know there's a few questions, but at some point I do need to like get a bit stretch my legs. So, how about this? Let's do. Let's see if I can actually find any that are not a 10-minute response. If there are, let me quickly browse.
I'll restrain myself.
Yeah. Well, because there's a couple in here that I'm looking at. So let's see. Anything that's like a quick one, quick for us to give context. Report, Copilot, generate text description, sales amount. Okay, so Raj did actually have a follow-up. I'll just read this live with you to see if we can understand it, because it is a follow-up to a question we asked him to reiterate. So I feel it's at least appropriate to look at it again. My earlier question on
definitely.
the fly calculation was related to why Copilot cannot generate explicit measures. I believe it is due to governance and performance reasons that Kurt is explaining, to what you were talking about like 5 minutes ago.
No, so it can generate explicit measures, right? Like an explicit measure is just a measure that exists in your model. So yeah, so I mean, yeah, you have the quick measures experience, but like even in the DAX query view, you can have these measures that are defined in the query, and you can add those to your model. I mean, you can. So the DAX query view provides ways for you to do that. So that is by definition then an explicit, measure. But the intent of that experience is indeed to generate queries, right? So that is but you can scoped within that query, of course, define measures. But the intent is indeed to generate those queries. So does that mean we'll never see an experience, in the formula bar to generate DAX like 4 measures? I don't know. So I have no idea. So, but yeah, I can imagine that might happen someday, but I have no idea if I'm honest. So, but I think we can already do quite a lot with the DAX query view. Yep. And of course, there's a lot of thought that needs to go into using it and applying it.
And also, just as a very quick shout out, the new Tyndall view is like amazing. I very much love it. As just another one of the views that you have as an option for advanced developer type stuff. But that's a whole separate like stream that we could talk about on that one. As some closing remarks, I'll go to you, Kerry, first, and then Kurt. Any final takeaways there? I think there was a couple hints at like what can people do to get started in some of this stuff. So any closing remarks and or recommended resources of places for people to go check out if they want to explore anything under the topic we had today.
Suggest reading Kurt's books. Probably one of the most detailed and informative things on the Copilot information. One of the reasons I did want
I'll drop a quick link.
Kurt's.
Yeah. Oh, Kurt's. Yeah.
One of the main reasons I did want to do this and I have this very detailed demo is it is kind of hard to fish through all this information and find the information you need if it is even there. And so I definitely recommend if you want more detail on Copilot, specifically in Fabric and Power BI, I would head there.
Excellent. I just dropped some links in the chat there, and it's actually been a little bit since I've gone to your homepage. I like that you rephrase the store as the Goblin Market. That's good.
I closed it temporarily, so because I was getting too many people from the States. I'm not allowed to sell in the States, and too many people from the States were trying to find loopholes to get stuff to the States, and it was starting to get burdensome time-wise.
Interesting. I didn't like. I'm surprised there's a restriction, but like we don't need to digress on that. But I mean,
it's a long
not
story.
A bad thing that a lot of people want to buy your products. So that's great.
Long story.
Yeah, I don't say it regularly, but I've continued to say it for the last few years that like in general, due to a variety of reasons, you're up there in my top 3 favorite blogs for sure. You somehow managed to be one of the most in-depth but also readable blogs. Like the best analogy I give is the Star Trek examples where they plethora on a bunch of scientific topics and then they summarize it to say, it's like overinflating a balloon. You have it. I think you do a good job of kind of doing that with a lot of what you write. It's like you go into detail but then explain it in a way that, oh, okay, well that helps explain complicated in a simple way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And like, if anyone wants to follow the stuff that I'm writing now, I'm writing primarily for SQL BI and for Tabular Editor. On my blog, I'm currently taking a hiatus from writing about Power BI and Fabric. I might write an update to my latest blog about Copilot because a lot of things have changed. I am, however, publishing some unplugged or unscripted videos on YouTube where I just kind of walk through examples and share my thoughts and observations. Because the content is quite scarce, and a lot of the content that I've seen about Copilot is, in my opinion, not critical enough about certain things. Not the product, right? Not the feature, but like more the application thereof. And if you're planning on using it or implementing it, you kind of need to think critically. So you can look there, like on YouTube, I will have videos. They're not going to be entertaining or like fancy. It's just like literally, I'm just going to record for 5 to 10 minutes and show some stuff. And then, yeah, but I'm not going to publish any new blogs for a while on my Data Goblin site because I'm focusing on some other stuff. But you can find things that I'm doing on SQL BI. So where we're, every week we got something cool. So
easy summarization of that is you're continuing to write, just not for your personal blog in the short term.
Yep.
And just I threw a quick link as well for Kerry, your site as well on the between you, NJ, and a few others. You're definitely also in my top 3 go-tos for recommendations on visual design, aesthetics, and like certainly your SVG library. So I wanted to make sure to give a shout out to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
Maybe to kind of close, like, I think that the future is changing a lot. There's a lot that's happening. There's a lot that's evolving. We're in a very dynamic world right now, you could say. And our markets and our tools are changing as well.
Yep.
And it's important to kind of keep up to date. It's important to stay critical, but it's also important to kind of explore, think about how you can leverage these things and where you might apply it, and what you might need to do in order to get the best value from it, and how you can protect yourself from falling victim to any of the risks or shortcomings, let's say. So,
well, when in doubt, just remember, this is fine.
This is fine.
That's amazing.
I think a couple of you know that meme.
Yeah.
The fire, this is fine dog with his coffee. Yeah, I have that for a specific reason. It's I look back like, no, it's okay. Things are fine.
I have a shirt with a goblin this is fine, and then on the back it says this is not fine, in the fire. So
nice. Well, with that, then I want to thank both of you for coming on. This has been a lot of fun. I knew there would be plenty of good banter and entertainment, as well as good topic discussion and everything else. And it seems like from the people who were here and a few who woke up and joined us towards the end, they were happy to participate. So thank you too, and also thank everyone in the chat for all the communication and questions throughout the way as well.
Yep, thanks for having us. It was fun. So looking forward to doing it again sometime.
Excellent. Yeah, and fingers crossed at some point in the near future we'll get a D&D session on, which I think will be an absolute blast when we finally get that up and off the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be very entertaining at a minimum for sure. But yes, Kerry,
I do voices. I do lots of voices.
I'll roll the dice.
Exactly. Yeah, just let your imagination run wild, and all the silly voices, at least 5. You can yeet your original voice off to the corner and then bring in your silly voice. I had to say the word one more time to close off.
It's an amazing word. I love the word.
It's one of my favorites for sure.
It makes me like.
Yeah.
Fills me with joy.
Anyway, you probably should get going.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kerry, thank you so much. Kurt, thank you so much. Everyone, have a great Friday and weekend, and I'll see you both on my channel again sometime. And have a good afternoon, Kerry, or evening. Have a good morning, Kurt. And I'm gonna head from here to my bed because it's 11:40 p.m.
All right.
Excellent.
Take care. Good night.
All right, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good take care. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.